I'm performing shapes as a piece of visual music. It's based on a transcription of J S Bach's first cello suite, which I play on the clarinet. The suite's 6 movements provide opportunities for expressing the intrinsic relationship that exists between music and abstract imagery. Within the constantly shifting patterns I've created, you'll begin to see, once or twice in each movement, certain images that resemble, sometimes closely, a particular type of abstract art. Now, I'm not going to give the game away just yet, but at the end of my performance, I'll name the artists I have in mind. They'll all be familiar to you, although possibly the first will be the most difficult to identify. At the outset of producing shapes, I had only a vague notion of where my processing codes would take me. I knew that I was exploring abstract art and artists, but in the event, the analogies I found have surprised me. There appear to be more common denominators than I would have expected between the computer images I've generated in a relatively random manner and the abstract works of 9 artists. Admittedly, in choosing my examples from both sources, digital and non-digital, I have needed to comb through many possibilities and reject most of them. But the fact remains that against the odds, I've found some remarkable simulacra. Let's look at them, one by one. The repetitive motive that occurs in the opening bars of the Prelude brings the angular shapes of a photograph by Alexander Rodchenko to mind. In this work, he was giving expression to the Soviet constructivist ideal of industrialized mechanization. At a midway point in the Prelude, my images jump ahead half a century to reflect the op art works of Victor Vasarely. Despite their appearance of mechanical precision, his paintings were painstakingly crafted by hand. In the opening section of the Allemande, I create shapes by projecting 3-dimensional forms onto a 2-dimensional surface. As it happens, Lyubov Popova uses a very similar method in creating her dynamic constructivist compositions. The first section repeat of the Allemande changes tack to produce a multiplicity of rectilinear colour juxtapositions. They resemble the pattern-making compositions of Giacomo Balla, an Italian futurist who was fascinated by the effects of iridescent colour. Op art makes a reappearance in the Courante. Here I produce black and white linear patterns which conjure up the mesmeric style of Bridget Riley. In the Sarabande, Bach creates music of deeply felt intensity with a sparse single line of notes. So too, in his modernist works of art, Ivan Hitchens uses blocks of colour to extract the essence from his subjects. By this means, he expresses sensations and feelings with the minimum of brushstrokes. As the Sarabande develops in complexity and texture, it's abstractions similar to Paul Klee's that begin to emerge. His lifelong admiration for the polyphony of Baroque music, such as Bach's First Cello Suite, make his inclusion in shapes particularly pertinent. In Minuets I II, I play a video game which generates a spontaneous eruption of shapes to produce patterns that resemble textile designs. Similarly, Hans Arp and his wife Sophie Tauber allow chance to play a part in their creative method. The concluding jig generates an ever-changing kaleidoscope of images, where in the second half the shapes and geometry of Ben Nicholson's work become evident. But as a gentle European constructivist, I think his chosen colour palette might well have been less random than mine. I've mentioned that the analogies I've found between the works of 9 abstract artists and their digital simulacra have surprised me. But should I be surprised? On reflection, the key to the common denominators between fine art and computer art lies in geometry. There are many forms of geometry from Euclidean onwards, but it is projective geometry which, as the most visual form, describes the way objects look rather than the way they are. It originated directly from the concerns of artists, and apart from defining the rules of perspective, it provides the mathematical means of defining coordinates for the coincidences that occur between the movement of complex shapes in space. I've used it, for instance, in creating the shifting patterns that you've seen in my projections. Which leads me to the conclusion that the geometric principles underlying fine art and computer art are common to both. The differences lie in their methods of application. And it's these available methods of application that have literally burst through the canvas to reach completely new territories. The computational opportunities now on offer far exceed the range of expression available to my 9 chosen abstract artists. Just think where they might have ventured if they had had access to today's digital technology. A question I posed in a recent paper with the title, "The Breadth of the Source Code Becomes the Brush of the Artist." My chosen artists might have dismissed new technology out of hand, but I think it's unlikely. Almost certainly, they would have realized its potential for unleashing a new power of creativity and expression. In saying this, I'm not intending to diminish in any way the inventiveness of what they achieved with more limited tools. They're the ones who conjured up memorable images. By comparison, my digital procedures, far from taking an imaginative leap forward, have succeeded merely in isolating a set of pale imitations. However, in my defense, I think I should remind you that my overall aim was to produce a piece of cohesive visual music. I hope I've succeeded at that level. In making shapes, I've become fascinated by a process that has enabled me to forge links between various art forms, not least music, of course, because after all, it was Bach's Cello Suite that provided the initial inspiration for the project.